Good afternoon and welcome to IBA News this Thursday, the 22nd of September. I'm Elon Aslan-Levy, joining you live from Jerusalem. In what is expected to be their last meeting while both still in office, US President Barack Obama told Prime Minister Netanyahu that the US is concerned to keep alive the possibility of a two-state solution and is worried about settlement construction. Speaking at the open section of their meeting last night in New York, Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked the president for his contribution to Israeli security and said he would not give up on the pursuit for peace. But behind the smiles today, US Ambassador Dan Shapiro told Army Radio that the president senses disappointment from his experience of interaction with the Prime Minister over the years, and US sources said the president was more pointed in his criticism during the half-hour private meeting.
Our hope is that we can continue to be an effective partner with Israel in finding a path to peace. Obviously, I'm only going to be president for another few months. The Prime Minister will be there quite a bit longer, and our hope will be that in these conversations we get a sense of how Israel sees the next few years, what the opportunities are and what the challenges are, in order to assure that we keep alive the possibility of a stable, secure Israel at peace with its neighbors, and a Palestinian homeland that meets the aspirations of their people.
I want to thank you for the many meetings we've had in which we discussed how to confront common challenges and how to seize common opportunities. The greatest challenge is, of course, the unremitting fanaticism. The greatest opportunity is to advance a durable peace. That's a goal that I and the people of Israel will never give up on. We've been fortunate that in pursuing these two tasks, Israel has no greater friend than the United States of America, and America has no greater friend than Israel.
Prime Minister Netanyahu will address the UN General Assembly tonight, expected to begin at 7:40 p.m. Israel time. That's just after midday in New York. Well, shortly before yesterday's meeting between the two statesmen, the Jerusalem Planning and Building Committee postponed discussions on approving construction of 67 housing units in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Gilo. Local media reports said when the committee convened, they received orders to delay the discussions, reportedly because of diplomatic pressure. Mayor Turgeman, head of the committee, told Israel Radio that the decision had been taken to avoid clashes during the meeting between the two leaders and said the committee would reconvene in 2 weeks' time. Touting its military prowess as it marked its annual anniversary of Iraq's 1980 invasion, the Islamic Republic of Iran paraded its latest military warfare through the streets of Tehran yesterday. A banner on one of the military vehicles warned Israel that Haifa and Tel Aviv will be turned into dust if the Zionist regime makes a mistake. Speaking on national television, the Iranian military's chief of staff referred to the latest military aid package signed between Israel and the United States as a criminal act, declaring the deal made his country more determined than ever to strengthen its own military might. Unveiled yesterday was Iran's latest precision-guided ballistic missile called Zol-Fajr, which has a range of 750 kilometers. Other missiles on display included the Qadr-H missile with a distance capability of 2,000 kilometers, as well as the Russian-supplied S-300 missile defense system. At the port of Bandar Abbas, the Iranian Navy also displayed some 500 vessels, submarines and helicopters. International efforts are underway to salvage the US-Russian brokered ceasefire in Syria and facilitate the resumption of humanitarian aid inside the war-torn country. Margaret Dudkevich reports.
The President of the Council.
The International Syria Support Group is set to convene later today to try and salvage the ceasefire in Syria that has deteriorated into almost total collapse, barely a week after it went into effect. Russia announced it was sending an aircraft carrier to waters off the Syrian coast. The United Nations said it was ready to resume deliveries of life-saving aid to the war-torn country, after relief was suspended following Monday's attack on a humanitarian aid convoy that killed 20 people. A statement released by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said the UN calls for safe, unconditional, unimpeded and sustained access to all Syrians in need wherever they are. The renewal of relief to Syria came just hours after the United States and Russia had a diplomatic face-off at a UN crisis meeting yesterday, where the sides sought to find ways of renewing the nationwide ceasefire ended by Syria on Monday in response to the US-led coalition strike on a Syrian army post that killed dozens of Syrian soldiers. In heated discussions, the US and Russia traded accusations over who was responsible for the deterioration in the situation and the targeting of the humanitarian aid convoy.
First, President Putin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, claims that the attack on the humanitarian convoy was somehow a necessary response to an alleged offensive by al-Nusra elsewhere in the country. That's the first claim. Then a Russian ambassador said that Russia and Syrian forces were not bombing the area, but they were targeting Khan Tuman. Then we heard a completely different story. The Defense Ministry said that the aid convoy had been accompanied by militants in a pickup truck with a mortar. We've seen no evidence of that.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called for a thorough and impartial probe into the attack on the humanitarian convoy.
All of our information indicates clearly that this was an airstrike. That means there only could have been two entities responsible, either the Syrian regime or the Russian government. In any event, we hold the Russian government responsible for airstrikes in this space, given that their commitment under the cessation of hostilities was to certainly ground air operations in places where humanitarian assistance is flowing.
If we allow spoilers to choose the path for us, the path of escalation, if we decide not to do what it takes to make this work, this cessation of hostilities, then make no mistake, my friends. The next time we convene here, we're going to be facing a Middle East with even more refugees, with more dead, with more displaced, with more extremists, and more suffering on an even greater scale.
The tit-for-tat diplomacy comes at the expense of the suffering of the Syrian civilians, who for more than 5 years have witnessed death and devastation.
So I want to emphasize this, and I emphasize this to Russia. The United States continues to believe there is a way forward that, although rocky and difficult and uncertain, can provide the most viable path out of the carnage.
Margo Dudkevich, IBA News.
Joining me now in the studio is Amotz Asael, senior columnist for the Jerusalem Post. Amotz, welcome.
Aylon.
There were smiles yesterday in the meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama, but the tension from the last 7-8 years has clearly not gone away. Do we know what happened in that closed-door meeting?
First of all, I beg to differ with the a common impression that there was much tension over there. My impression was that this was the quiet after the storm, that both men realized that we're in the twilight of the Obama presidency. Barack Obama has lost the energy and also the motivation to leave an imprint on the Middle East. He understands that on top of everything else, despite the chronology that leads to the end of his presidency, there now is also a domestic American circumstance that makes him have to throw his full weight behind Hillary Clinton's shaky presidential candidacy, and this means that he cannot right now fiddle with the Middle East.
But do we know what happened in that closed-door meeting, or have they been very strict about preventing any leaks coming out?
I'm unaware of any certainly dramatic leaks about what transpired there. One can assume that there was an exchange of the usual ideological broken records that both men are committed to. It's clear that the differences between them are, in this narrow regard, unbridgeable and unchangeable.
They
But
both understand that neither is going to get anything out of the other one in the next few
absolutely, neither
months.
is going to
Okay.
convince the other to change
Well,
his
in the
spots.
open section of the meeting, which was open to the press, President Obama said that he wants to see how Israel sees the next few years. Should we read a certain frustration or disappointment into this remark?
Of course, he's frustrated about the Middle East in general. It's clearly going to be, when his presidency is summed up by historians, the Middle East, broadly speaking, will loom as one of his worst failures. This is the same Middle East that he inherited with, for instance, a staunch ally like Hosni Mubarak, whom he eased out of office and then lost Egypt largely or partly to Russian tutelage. It is the Middle East where civil wars erupted left and right, with him being completely unable to control any of the events. And on top of all that, he also had great pretensions about an Israeli-Palestinian peace that he never delivered. So of course he's frustrated.
And so do you think perhaps, besides the sound bites about settlement construction, he realizes that with all the problems in the region, this isn't the issue he wants to lock horns with at the moment?
I think he understands that in the broader scheme of things, as they have transpired, this has become marginal. And in terms of the narrow relationship between him and Netanyahu, there is actually more in common than people appreciate. They're both products of the era of televised politics, and they're masters of the public oration, and they're both also in their emotional structure very similar. They're cold fish, they're very intellectual, and they might even, in the aftermath of all this, be pretty good friends.
Okay, well, the Obama presidency isn't over just yet, and of course there's this lame duck period between the election and Obama's exit from office. Many concerns that he might choose that period to launch some sort of diplomatic offensive, not use the American veto in the UN. Where do you see this going forward?
If he does this before the elections, then he seriously risks Hillary Clinton's
it's unlikely to
candidacy.
happen before
We
the
no
election.
longer expect that, although, surprises can always come. And if he does this after the election, regardless of the results, then people bring to mind, of course, Bill Clinton's active involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations back in his own lame duck period, but there is a big difference. Back then, he was working consensually as far as America was concerned, and also with Israel's full cooperation. This would be a creature that American history has never seen. In other words, an American lame duck president trying to do something that is controversial, both within his country and vis-a-vis his country's relations with an ally, and I don't see that happening.
Moving over briefly to the broader region, to Syria, with the ceasefire having collapsed last week, where might the US and Russia try to take this diplomatically?
I think, first of all, that we've just heard John Kerry say some statements that reflect a deep naivete. He is actually assuming, for instance, that the Russians see as a bad thing Syria's exportation of many refugees to Europe.
Which they don't necessarily. It's a means for Russia to further destabilize Europe itself.
Which is an aim for Vladimir Putin. So I think that there is some naivete at play on the part of the Americans in this negotiation. And the Americans would be very practical if they realized that rather than seek ceasefires in Syria, which will in any event be shaky, and we Israelis recall vividly from the Lebanese civil war, regardless of our own involvement there, how ceasefires came and went almost daily. Seeking ceasefires in this complex conflict is a non-starter. Seeking the remapping of Syria is a starter, and it has begun last month with Turkey's invasion of northern Syria. That is where the solution lies, not necessarily Turkey, but the remapping of Syria, which would respect the Alawite minority's demands and fears of the Sunni majority, but not in a way that allows it to attack the Sunni majority the way it has been doing.
Is there any
5
indication?
years.
Is there any indication that perhaps the big players might come around to this thought that Syria needs a division rather than trying to retain it?
There are indications. The biggest indication is in Russia's acquiescence with Turkey's invasion. The invasion, we should recall, came immediately after Erdogan's very improbable visit to the Kremlin, and just before the Turkish chief of staff hosted the Russian chief of staff. This is done in concert with Russia, ostensibly against Russia's interests. It means that Russia too understands that Syria needs to be somehow remapped, and this is where America should be headed to.
Interesting. Perhaps change is afoot. Amos, thank you very much.
Thank you, Elon.
Two young Israeli women were killed in a fatal accident in the south last night when their car smashed into a street light at the Revachat junction on Road 35 between Kiryat Gat and Ashdod. Meitar Lugassi and Nirit Vitonevsky, both aged 23, were on their way to attend an evening reunion with their work colleagues before the crash. According to an initial investigation, the young women failed to give way at an intersection and their vehicle crashed into a passing car, likely injuring its driver before smashing into the streetlight. Police arrested 23 people early this morning in raids in Shuafat and Isawiya in East Jerusalem. Security forces conducted searches and confiscated illegal weapons, including ammunition clips, pistols and bullets, police said. Those arrested are suspected of being involved in rioting and clashes with security forces and possessing illegal arms. This morning's raid comes after a spike in terror incidents in Jerusalem and across Judea and Samaria, provoking fears of an escalation over the High Holy Days. Police in the Negev discovered a 43-year-old man chained to a tin shack in the Bedouin village of Al-Fura for the past 5 years by his family members who claim he is mentally unstable. More on this disturbing incident from Aryeh O'Sullivan.
Police in the midst of demolition of an illegal structure in the Bedouin village of Al-Fura near Arad heard crying coming from a tin shack. What they found was shocking. A man naked as the day he was born, unshaven and filthy, chained by his feet and hands to a post inside a tin shack. All he had was a blanket to cover himself with. He claimed that he was in the shack in the middle of the desert for years. The 43-year-old man was evacuated by Magen David Adom to Soroka Hospital in Beersheba for treatment, and the social services were called in. This ambulance medic said the man was in a horrific, neglected and malnourished state, and he had trouble speaking. They understood from him that his family had chained him up to the shack. His family members told Channel 1 that they had put him in the shack because he was mentally unstable and no hospital would take him. Police summoned his father and brother for questioning, and they told them that they chained him up for the past 5 years because he was violent towards children and threw stones at anyone who got near him. And he also couldn't control his bodily functions. They were released with restrictions while the investigation continues. Aryeh O'Sullivan for IBA News.
The condition of Israel's ninth president, Shimon Peres, remains stable, with a slight improvement in his breathing, according to a statement by his office today. Doctors said the 93-year-old former president, who suffered a major stroke 9 days ago, is slowly making progress, with doctors continuing to monitor his neurological condition. In the continuing war against work and business on Shabbat, the Jerusalem municipality has announced its intention to prosecute 8 grocery stores for operating on Saturday. More on the growing tensions surrounding religious strictures in public life in this report from Aryeh O'Sullivan.
Ultra-Orthodox Jews walking past the Alma Cafe, which is open on the Sabbath. Despite the protests, the Alma Cafe is one business in Jerusalem that has managed to keep its doors open on Saturday, saying it was their busiest day of the week. But the government has been under pressure from ultra-Orthodox coalition partners to suspend work on the Sabbath. As a result, weekend work was moved, and that caused a traffic meltdown and special buses as the train stations closed for the construction midweek. In Jerusalem, secular mayor Nir Barkat ordered the enforcing of laws requiring supermarkets and businesses downtown to shut on the Sabbath. Some secular Israelis are getting fed up.
I think that the dominance of the religious parties make it very difficult for us to be tolerant. I think people should be more tolerant. I think about half of the city is interested in going out, sitting with your family, have a cup of coffee, see a film if you feel like it. And people prevent it. And that makes many people very angry.
Ultra-Orthodox, like journalist Moshe Glasner, says businesses open on the Sabbath were committing a social crime by stealing away clients from those who observe the Sabbath, and that wasn't fair. Still, there's a fine line between each side respecting the other.
Well, I think that there needs to be a bit of freedom so that people can enjoy certain products on Saturday, but also respecting what is set in the land as far as those that believe everything needs to be closed. So there's a delicate balance that needs to be played out here. And for instance, just a juice station at the end of a walkway shouldn't cause any problem.
In a breathtaking advance for biblical scholarship, scientists have succeeded in virtually unwrapping a lump of charcoal to reveal it as a burnt 3rd century copy of the Book of Leviticus. The scorched ancient scroll was discovered in an ancient synagogue in En Gedi near the Dead Sea, ravaged by a fire around the year 600 CE. Computer scientists virtually flattened out 3D X-ray scans of the document to read the original Hebrew, which turned out to be a completely identical copy to the Book of Leviticus used today. The revolutionary technique opens the possibility that other fragments hitherto thought lost to history could still be deciphered. The computer scientists at the University of Kentucky hope to repeat the experience with a library of Roman scrolls burned and buried in Herculaneum during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius 2 millennia ago. More science. At the European Union contest for young scientists in Brussels, the Israeli teenage delegation came away with 4 top prizes. Naama Shou of Sde Boker, Tal Cohen, Amalia Ben Asher and Yuval Feldman of Carmiel, and Boutros Moualem of Nazareth represented Israel after winning the national competition in Jerusalem in March. 4 of them won Intel International Science and Engineering Fair prizes, putting them forward to the International Intel competition next May. The winning projects included an investigation linking the biological clocks of morning or evening types with decision-making ethics, and technology to deliver infusions to patients on a rotating basis from different bags. Very impressive. In finance, the stock exchange ends the week slightly up and the shekel is mixed. In weather, with autumn officially here, temperatures are dropping as if by clockwork. Temperatures are expected to fall again tomorrow, becoming unseasonably cool with isolated rain showers from the north to the northern Negev. On Saturday, temperatures will recover slightly with strong northerly winds along the coast come the afternoon. That's all for today and this week. Until Sunday, it's a good evening and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.